know Jutta, one of the organizers of this online seminar, professor at the University of Vienna, and of course one of the collaborators of the Athanasius Werke series. So we all owe her the documents of the Arian crisis and a few more documents and works by Athanasius. And she has turned to other new topics lately, for example, Sunday in the late antiquity and Middle Ages. And she's going to begin the second session speaking about the ek des ousiyas, the biblical background of this unbiblical phrase, ek des ousiyas to patros. So we're hearing you with impatience, Jutta.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for your interest. So I just share my screen, just a second. Hopefully you are able now to see it. And just a second. So let me start with a general introduction. Since the Bible is not a systematic theological work and individual biblical books were written at different times, single verses have repeatedly provided material for heated theological disputations. And this was also the case in the Trinitarian debate, which dominated the 4th century. Here, some verses were repeatedly at the center of the treatises, which even seems to contradict each other. You are very familiar with the verse in John 10:30, I and the Father are one, and also the Father is greater than I in John 14:28. But it was not only passages from the New Testament, but also from the Old Testament, whose interpretation was controversial. The most well-known verse was certainly Proverbs 8:22. And even Emperor Constantine probably referred to this verse in his famous letter to the opponents Arius and Alexander of Alexandria. So he compares here the Trinitarian dispute to a conflict between philosophical schools, which resolves around only a few passages in the Bible. And I need not quote and read out the text here now in detail, because I think you are quite familiar with it, that Constantine here states that the controversy was about only a passage in the law, or rather about an unimportant part of it, and that it's only a small dispute and not concerns the whole text. So interestingly is nevertheless that Emperor Constantine knew about the relevance of biblical verses within this debate. And with skilled rhetoric, he tried to play down the dispute in order to persuade the Jew to settle their difference. And of course, he also threw the weight of imperial power into the balance. As is well known, this was unsuccessful, and this was certainly also due to the fact that it was not only this just one biblical verse, but many others too. And this is precisely why I want to address in my contribution and to highlight a different biblical verse. And you know already what's about, because it's included in the title. The interpretations of this verse are a good indicator of different theological profiles, and it's also obviously one of the important proofs for the Nicene term, which you all know, ek des ousiyas to patros. From one of the earliest documents in the Trinitarian controversy, the letter of Arius to his bishop Alexander, it is clear that Arius asked for care in the interpretation of a few biblical passages that he found difficult. And you know probably all of the first paragraph here that Arius is very hesitant in describing the generation of the Logos out of God in relation to ideas which may be linked to Gnostic concepts, as he especially mentions here Valentinus and Mani, and then also continues with Sabellius. And interestingly, in the final part of this letter, I quote, he states, "But if statements like out of him and out of the womb and out of the Father I went out and came are interpreted by some as if he were his homoousion part or an emanation, then according to their conception, the Father is a composite, divisible, dividable, changeable, and a body." Arius here gives 3 biblical verses, or even alludes to more, in a very aphoristic form, including also Psalm 109, verse 3, with the expression out of the womb. And what they have all in common here is the use of the preposition ek. I have translated it here with out of, which hints at a strong connection between the two entities, more than translating it simply with from. Interestingly, later on, Athanasius, I will come to this later, will quote this psalm verse as an important biblical proof for the Nicene phrase ectes usias tu patros. So some remarks about this psalm in general. So I do not want to go into detail on these verses of the whole psalm. I just want to demonstrate with this slide that Psalm 109 is one of the psalms which was quoted already in the New Testament. These are all these references highlighted in red here on the slide. That means that a Christological interpretation was already given in the New Testament. Therefore, a reference to Christ can actually be found in all commentaries also on the Psalms, and also explains the citation of this psalm in the Trinitarian theological context. You may be more familiar with the use of verse 1 here because it seems to express a subordination of the Son to the Father and has therefore been a subject of debate. However, this contribution is about verse 3, or actually verse 3c, which Arius alluded to in this in his letter. So again, to Arius, the short biblical reference in this letter are only understandable if the biblical verses were, on the one hand, well known, and on the other hand, discussed already. He only needs to quote 2 or 3 words, and everybody, or at least the addressees, know what he is talking about. Of course, Arius does not want to alter the biblical text, but he does want to avert a possible misunderstanding. Interestingly, the ousia terminology, which is so important for the Nicene Creed, also occurs here. It seems that we have arrived at a central point here in the early debate at all. Arius considers it important to point out the following. The Bible does refer to Christ as the Son of God and to God as his Father. However, caution is advised here for 2 reasons. Either one spontaneously develops false human conceptions of procreation and transfers them to God, when speaking of Father and Son and describing the Son as generated out of the Father. This is to be avoided or excluded, of course. Second, one even may come up with ideas that are more associated with Gnosticism and imagining the origin of the Son from the Father as a so-called emanation. The term homoousios would then be linked to this very idea. And this is actually very important for the Arius understanding of these ousia terminology, and is actually also what the studies of Frauke Dinsen, Christopher Steed, and Martin von Ostheim have shown us, that this ousia terminology and homoousios has a philosophical context, and within Christian texts especially has to be related to concepts of Gnosticism. Apparently, Arius saw the danger of connecting Psalm 109:3 to Gnostic ideas if read without caution. For Arius, what one has to see here, it is self-evident that this psalm verse refers to the pre-eternal generation of the Son from the Father, and it is precisely for this reason that he expresses reservations about the interpretation which I mentioned already. So this is a slight visualization of the concept, perhaps what could be an emanation look like and what actually Arius wanted to avoid. Please excuse my modern secular visualization, but the psalm verse of 109:3 has the image of out of the womb, so I felt that I have the right to use a modern comparable image of emanation, perhaps. Interestingly, we have something comparable in Eusebius of Caesarea already. The famous Eusebius of Caesarea dealt with this psalm verse in his apologetic 2-volume work Preparatio and Demonstratio Evangelica, and I just want to make it with the slide quite short. He obviously regarded this verse as a prophetic testimony to the pre-worldly procreation of the Son from God the Father. And he emphasizes, of course, that womb is to be understood figuratively, it is a metaphor. And birth is therefore also a metaphor. And you see here, after he quoted this psalm verse, what he states, of course, this is to be understood not by projection, nor by division, or scission, or diminution, or even conceivable mode of bodily birth. And as when it was said that we was born from the womb of God before the morning star, and we understand it figuratively. Interestingly, this limitation or caution is reminiscent of Arius' reservations. In fact, even some of the terms are the same. One has the impression that Arius is referring here to Eusebius. Eusebius also recognizes in the psalm a revelation of David, which emphasizes Christ as the Son of God and sets them apart from other prophecies or high priests. Only Christ is the only Son of God. So just to make it short, Eusebius' short explanation here in Demonstratio Evangelica. I jump to another theologian, namely Alexander of Alexandria. Interestingly, Alexander of Alexandria, although he rejects the theological ideas of Arius, was also in line of thought with this. Indeed, he himself quotes this verse of the psalm for refuting Arius. He quotes 109 verse 3 as a proof that Christ is the only begotten Son of God, begotten by God. In both of the letters that have come down to us from Bishop Alexander, he addresses this psalm in this respect. And you have the short quotations from here on the slide. So on the one hand, in Urkunde 4b and in Urkunde 14, both times this psalm was quoted by Alexander. In the first text as mainly a proof directed against the topic or the conception that the Son is ex hoc onton. No, he is not out of nothing, but Psalm 109:3 proves that he is out of God because it's stated out of the womb before the morning star I begot you. And the second quotation is also interesting in this his other long letter. It is a proof which Arius Alexander shows here that Psalm 109:4 demonstrates a kind of natural sonship of the Son of God. I quote, for in contrast to the sons who are not his own, he said that he was his own son. So it's not on the slide, but it's just the sentence before. And here we have idion hyon. And he quotes then Matthew 3:17 and Psalm 2 verse 7. By showing the authenticity of the sonship, he points out that he does not have other genuine sons besides this one. And then follows this, what is on the slide. And what about the passage, out of the womb I bore you before the morning star? Does it not show the natural sonship from paternal delivery, which the son has attained not by practice and diligent improvement, but by his natural peculiarity? Therefore, the Father's only begotten Son has also an unchangeable sonship. So the way Alexander uses this verse from the psalm is interesting. He understands it as an excellent proof of the natural sonship of Christ, eternally begotten of the Father. Surprisingly, he does not mention the critical remarks of Arius. Either he simply ignores the reservations of him, or he sees no need to go into further detail and discuss the problem in a letter to someone outside Alexandria. I do not know. I have no fitting or better explanation at the moment. In any case, he also, as Arius and Eusebius, understands the procreation of the Son in a figurative sense, of course, and does not assume a division of the divine essence. Perhaps he simply does not want to go without this psalm verse, for him a wonderful proof of the procreation of the Son from the Father. I jump to another theologian, perhaps here another visualization for Alexander's understanding. I have just moved it a little bit to show the difference, but also to demonstrate the congruency between the theologians. I come now to Eusebius of Nicomedia. Eusebius of Nicomedia. We do not have many texts of him, but one letter is interesting, namely his letter to Paulinus of Tyrus. This is this letter where Eusebius urges Paulinus to engage himself and not to be silent anymore and take part and act as a theologian and theologian here in the Trinitarian debate. And within this, Eusebius of Nicomedia describes the discussion and the critical points and what is in his perspective the most important topic. And here one can find a similar point of criticism what we have already found in Arius. Here we can read but he would no longer be said to be created or established if he came from him, that is, from him as if he were a part of him or as an emanation of his ousías. So the concept of emanation, which is related to materialistic thinking and Gnosticism, is here also at stage, and meros, and not probole, but aporoias tes ousías is the terminology of Eusebius of Nicomedia. And interestingly, we also have a further interesting topic of or accent on what is a special profile of Eusebius of Nicomedia is that this phrase ectes ousías is a special concern of Eusebius of Nicomedia, namely to understand that the Son is not ectes ousías to patros. And in this only complete surviving letter, he rejects this idea that the Son came into being from the essence of the Father actually 4 times. So this is really important for Eusebius of Nicomedia. So besides this here in paragraph 5 in this letter, we have actually also in paragraph 3, 6, and 7 similar utterances by Eusebius of Nicomedia, that the Son is not out of his ousia, and he does not share the nature of the unbegotten at all, nor is he out of its ousia, and so on. And this is also in paragraph 6. Yet if the fact that he is called begotten gives some grounds for saying that he came to be from the ousia of his father and has thereby the same nature, we recognize that the scripture does not speak of him alone as begotten, but also of things totally unlike him by nature. And then in paragraph 7, you also read something comparable. For nothing comes from his ousias, ectes ousias autou. So this is really an important topic in this one letter of Eusebius of Nicomedia. And interestingly, I have not put it here on the slide, so you have to believe me now. After the Council of Nicaea, we have this letter of Constantine to the city or the Christians in Nicomedia. And here also Constantine mentions that here is made a decision against not saying ectes ousia. I quote, "What is the wickedness of this band of robbers that appeared, which denies that the Son of God proceeded from the indivisible ousia of the Father?" So we have a reflection in a way of a special Nicomedian profile of theology, not only in the letter of Eusebius of Nicomedia, but also then in the letter of Constantine, writing after the decision of Nicaea to the Nicomedians. So I jump to my last theologian, which I have mentioned already at the beginning, Athanasius of Alexandria. The successor of Alexander also gives us a quotation of Psalm 109, verse 3, and uses this as one of the important biblical proofs for the correctness of the Nicene terminology. It is interesting to note that he does not follow Marcellus in this instance. I have not included Marcellus in my presentation because, in contrast to all the other interpretations I have presented so far, Marcellus refers this psalm verse to the incarnation, so to say, to the Christmas story. But although Athanasius in many other instances follows Marcellus with this hermeneutical strategy, he is not doing this with this psalm verse. He is more like Alexander of Alexandria and following up his line. So he quotes this verse in this famous treatise some decades after Nicaea in De Decretis Nicaeae Synodi, and even 2 times. As stated, this verse describes the generation of the Son of God before incarnation for Athanasius. And the first quotation is in chapter 13, where this psalm verse serves as a proof that Christ is God's Son and not a creature. So a little bit comparable to Alexander. And the second quotation in chapter 21, there we can find explicit discussing. This is the part in the Decretus where Athanasius discusses the phrase of the Nicene Creed, ectes ousias tu patros. And here, Psalm 109:3 is one of the biblical verses which serves as a proof that one has really to think about that Christ is out of God's ousia. And here it is so far, therefore, interesting. I do not know how to interpret this with relation to the debates of Nicaea. So on the one hand, one could say Athanasius is simply following Alexander in his way of referring to the Bible, a biblical text as proof, or if one believes Mark Smith, who has presented in Oxford a talk and wanted to give more credit to this treatise of Athanasius, that it has some remembrance of actual debates of Nicaea, then if we believe this interpretation, one could even say that at Nicaea, this biblical psalm verse was actually at the stage and was used as a biblical proof to include then Ectes Usias to Patros in the Nicene Creed. So we have here Athanasius in a way similar to Alexander. Yeah, just a remembrance, Ectes Usia to Patros and not Ectes. You know all this text. A little summary. Psalm 109:3 played a greater role in the debate than has been analyzed so far. This verse from the psalm is connected with the debate about the manner of the Son's emergence or begetting from the Father before creation. Alexander refers the verse as a good evidence for his theology, but Arius sees caution required here. A similar criticism of Arius can already be found in Eusebius of Caesarea. It is directed mainly against Gnostic ideas and a materialistic thinking. Eusebius of Nicomedia addresses the same reservations as Arius. He most strongly rejects from the essence out of the Father. The Nicene Creed now expressly emphasizes that the Son was begotten from the essence of the Father, and this is directed primarily against Eusebius of Nicomedia, but of course also against Arius. Athanasius, in turn, defends the Nicene terminology in his late work, De Decretis Nicaeae Synodi, or precisely this expression with this verse from the Psalm. This proves that the verse is to be understood as one of the biblical references for the Nicene terminology. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jutta. And so now the questions.
Well, I have a question that it is related with my paper, and then we can maybe start this discussion. And it's about the role that the two-stage Christology played in this scenario, in the sense that to say ectes usias could also be interpreted in the sense that the internal logos was inside. This internal logos was agenetos because it was not generated, and then it came out from God, and this would be like the two-stage Christology. And then the reaction of Eusebius and Arius, and also Eusebius of Caesarea, Arius, and Eusebius of Nicomedia. What do you think? I think that it is a reaction not only against Gnosticism and materialistic view of the ousia, but also this two-stage Christology.
Well, thank you for this additional observation. It may be, but it's not discernible from the evidence in direct reading. So if you want to detect here a two-stage Christology, one has to argue around some corners. So it's not directly present here. So it may be, then you must say that the reservation of Arius in his letter, that is what he is quoting there, Valentinus, Hierarchus, and Mani, then this is only one side, and but he does not mention than the other side, two-stage logos Christology. Where we can find an argumentation against it is actually in the later treatise of Athanasius. There he is arguing to defend ectes usias, but also homoousios. And one can find an argumentation which is or looks like as is it's more directly to concept we can find perhaps in Asterius or the where we can find it, but not directly here in these early letters. So either one has implicitly to find it or read between the lines and integrate it, but not really in the direct reading there. Yeah. So it's what strike me is that what Arius presents here is so similar to what Eusebius in Demonstratio presents. And this is not discussing two-stage logos theology or not in this passage here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, I have a question about the verse Psalm of the Psalm, and it seems that what is important in the verse is only the preposition ek. If I'm not mistaken, no one comments about ek gastros or about the before the morning star. I tell this because actually yesterday, casually, I was reading a commentary by Didymus, where he states something about ectes gastros. He says that gaster is where children come from. But to my knowledge, is the only one to make a comment about that. Do you think the gaster has something to do with the ousia in Alexander's thought or others?
Yeah, it's not explicitly stated. In Athanasius, where we have a more thorough argumentation, there it is directly linked and then stated that it is to be, of course, as a metaphor. So it's not really, yeah, of course, God has not a womb, so to say, simply. Yeah. But you're right. Thank you for this observation in this very small quotation of Arius in his letter. It is what all these biblical verses have together is this ek. And so really Arius was more concerned about the ek and how the process someone ek something, something coming ek from something, how this is to be understood. This is more his concern. It is for Arius obviously taken for granted that this psalm verse is to be related to the pre-eternal generation. So this is he not discussing. Well, he could have presented and said, well, we do not know it, but it is obviously the case that he is not referring this to the incarnation. Otherwise, he would not have made so much of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Glenn has a question.
Yes, Uta, having looked at this one passage recently, does this give you any hints or new observations about the chronology of some of these early Urkunden, which we go back? Does anything new come out of this, or does this just confirm your previous assumptions?
I thought about it. Thank you, therefore, for this question. You know that there's much discussion with relation to chronology, especially about the two letters of Alexander. But interestingly, in both letters, he quotes this psalm verse, and in both letters, he is not reacting on something like criticism of Arius. So one cannot really make some chronological observations out of it, so that it would be fine, but it's not possible. So that Alexander writes and quoting Psalm 109:3, then Arius is criticizing it, and then Alexander again quotes it, but refers to this criticism and refutes it again. So it's not like this. So it's a little bit strange. So if you put the one letter first or the other letter first, so we do not have evidence. And this is what I've stated already, that it's a little bit strange that Alexander is not referring to a point of criticism Arius is presenting here, but perhaps he just, for him it's taken for granted that it is a metaphor, and one does not have to argue about it. And if one just accepts that it's a metaphor, it's an excellent proof for the pre-existent generation out of the Son. And he doesn't want to go, obviously, without this psalm verse, as he quotes this in both letters.
Thank you very much. Ruth also had a question.
No, thank you. I hope you can hear me. I have a hint to you, Mr. Morales, to ask if there are commentaries on Ekastros, and I've written a long book about the history of the reception of Psalm 110, and it's Hilarius who explains ex utero meaning as ex se. But I think you're right that the early mentions of or mentioning the Psalm verse 110:3, they only are interested in the preposition. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, and one has obviously to look at the genre of the text we are looking at. So we have these controversial letters of the Trinitarian debate, but if you look at Psalm commentaries, the picture is different. And what I have skipped here is the interesting observation that Eusebius of Caesarea himself, in his later work, the Psalm commentary, he himself relates this verse to the Incarnation. And this is a very interesting observation. And here he quotes then Aquila and Symmachus on all the other Greek translations, and then sees that others have not Ekastros, but Mary, Mariam, and so that is a hint to incarnation. And so we have here, in a way, well, you know that Eusebius of Caesarea is against Marcellus quite strongly in De Ecclesiastica Theologia, and of course contra Marcellum. And Marcellus is the guy who related this psalm verse to the Incarnation, but Eusebius in his late psalm commentary is doing the same with a little different argumentation. But the one fragment we have on this psalm verse, which is transmitted with Catena manuscripts, we have the same a comparable interpretation. So this is interesting. Mark,
the floor is yours.
So, hi, Uta. I know this might be like a question that you and Samuel want to debate maybe after your papers, but in a recent article, Michelle Barnes argued that from the essence of the Father was the most important phrase for the Nicene Creed, and that homoousios was a kind of gloss on that. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I thank you very much. I think he has an important point with it, because we are because perhaps from our perspective of reception that the term homoousios turned to be a shibboleth, something like that we are too one-sided, concentrated on homoousios, and in a way neglect ectes ousias. So it's a little bit secondary, but actually because the son is out of the ousia, the father, therefore the son is homoousios to the father. And it's also the way Athanasius explains it. So he starts with ectes ousias, and then in the Decretus, the second passage or the second block of argumentation is for homoousios. So from theological thinking, one has to start with ectes ousias, and this results then in the son is homoousios to patri, I think. And I really I haven't noticed it before in this striking manner that really Eusebius of Nicomedia is so aggressive against ectes ousias. So it's not very long. It's one-page letter, and 4 times he criticizes that nobody should think about the son being ectes ousia to patros. So I think a little bit, I know, Samuel, you have a different opinion about the role of the Eusebians at Nicaea, but I think including ectes ousias in the Nicene Creed, if you look at what we have in this letter of Eusebius of Nicomedia, it's really striking that Eusebius of Nicomedia is so critical about ideas with ectes ousias. So it's really, I think, a topic, and we have not so many sources of. I think it would be very fine to have more letters and treatises also of Eusebius of Nicomedia that would help us a lot. Yeah.